Welcome to Night Clerk Radio, episode 24. We are covering Semiconductor Wave. Allegedly. That's one of the tags. I just really wanted to say it. I'm Burke, and with me is Ross. Hi, Ross.
Hello. How you doing?
Hello. I'm good. I have a bit of trivia for you today.
Oh, yeah?
So this is our 24th episode, of course. But did you also know it's our last episode? Because one of the albums you picked today is 5 hours long. And then quitting forever.
Oh, no. My hubris.
Your hubris.
I went too far. Like Icarus, I went into this. I thought we could just review any album, and then I realized
anything.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, we are covering two artists today who I think their common link is that they both use computers in really interesting ways to produce not just music, but there's also a strong visual component to what they do. So we're covering Master Boot Record and Fornax Void.
Yeah, both of these artists are interesting because, I mean, this is very hauntologically themed because this is about the past, haunting the present. For most people, they can't really distinguish the nuances in the eras of computing technology and culture. But there is a very large distinction between, say, the computing of the late 80s to, like, say, the mid 90s. Just like a 5-10 year difference puts a lot of difference in, like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And this is sort of like a perfect example of that because Master Boot Records obviously laser focused on the DOS era, the prime era of MS-DOS.
Yeah. DOS and floppies.
Yeah. Before Windows took over, DOS at its most powerful. And Fornax Void is more about sort of the 90s, like is what followed, like the mid 90s kind of like beginning of Windows, not even Windows 95. I mean, a little of Windows 95, but also like Windows 3.1 and sort of very corporate 90s utopian environment.
Like the early rise of internet culture, too.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of references to cyberspace. Like no one calls it cyberspace anymore.
Yeah.
So that's such like a anachronistic term.
And it's also like those other like computer OSs that we don't even remember even much, like the Amiga. I get a big Amiga vibe from Fornax Void.
I have a weird memory of some of those because my friend's dad, when I was a kid, was an IBM engineer. So all the computers in their house had to run like OS2 Warp for a while.
Yeah, OS2 Warp. There we go. There's another one. Yeah. Like all these, evolutionary dead ends of graphical user interfaces. And Fornax Void is, I mean, when we get into his album, we'll go more into this like, it's his whole thing. And he's been working on this kind of thing for years. But like Master Boot Record, again, is really focused on this. I don't know. A lot of people consider it the prime era of computing, of just like when you had to be a true nerd to be into computers. Because like, there's nothing sexy about them. They were all like disk drives, floppy disks.
Yeah. The sexiest thing was Matthew Broderick.
Yeah, exactly. Fucking war games and shit like that.
But it is a time, I think, that's appealing because I was thinking about this because it does factor into kind of the lost technologies aspect that comes up in a lot of like vaporwave and this type of music. And I think you nailed it. That nerd aspect, it's from an era when computers were sort of othering, like it was like a thing that other people were into. They weren't ubiquitous like they are now. The joke I sort of had in the show notes, it was like being at a computer meant I was left alone playing Doom, not explaining Wall Street bets to my dad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, being back in the 80s, back in the Master Boot Record era, that was to be into computers was kind of inexplicable. People couldn't understand why you want to do that. Like it just didn't look, it's not like today where, there's all these fun things you can do in games and chatting with people and video and all this fun stuff. No, there was like a text interface. You had to type in commands. You didn't understand this shit. The best game available was Doom.
Ooh, I don't know. People might come for you for that one. I agree.
Yeah. A man cannot live on Doom alone.
He also needs Sierra Adventures, Ross.
Oh, yeah. He needs Sierra Adventures. So, and we didn't really set out to make this episode themed this way, but these are, in a way, these artists are kind of a yin and a yang to each other. It's sort of like the duality of obsolete computer technology. They're really good contrast to each other. Yeah, I'm really excited to dive in.
Yeah, I think there's not a whole lot of preamble for both of these albums, so why don't we just get right into it? That's the literal intro of the very catchily named C: right angle bracket defrag from Master Boot Record. Right away, the DOS theming is immediately in the album title. They've done this all the time for other albums. They have ones that are like check disk, copy, autoexec.bat, etc.
DOS commands.
DOS commands, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is Master Boot Record. They're self-described as a 33 megahertz 486 chip processing avant-garde chiptunes. That's the kind of in character. And they produce music that is chiptunes, as you heard, and heavily influenced by like classical metal, video games, synth waves. And probably they have the distinction of the first artist, maybe, that we've done on the show, who's in both the Synthwave Wiki and the Encyclopedia Metallum.
Yeah, this is true. This is not, I mean, this is not Vaporwave. This is definitely not dark ambient, but it's definitely haunted.
Yes.
Also, I believe that was from track 1, which was Cluster 777.
That's right.
And the second track on the album is called Cluster 1337, which is LEET, short for elite in LEET speak. I do like this album. One thing I do like, just going back to sort of Master Boot Record sort of iconography, their style isn't just all their album covers look like they would fit on a DOS screen or like a Doom WAD expansion, Mega Doom. There's also this sort of occult angle to it, and in some ways like literal, right? Because like occult is just comes from I think the Latin word for hidden. There are ciphers embedded in the liner notes of this album, along with every other album.
He's very into locking bonus content behind either binary codes or ciphers or some type of crypto work.
And even the album art for this album has a bunch of occult symbols drawn in a DOS defrag menu, like showing sectors of a hard drive.
Yeah.
And some of the other albums also have occult symbols or weird symbols, but drawn in ASCII or there's the occult. There's also like, it reminds me of Ware's art of like when apps were pirated, there would be a little text file with like weird ASCII symbols to make ASCII art on it.
Yep.
And I quite like the style. The presentation is 10 out of 10. Very spooky pirated Doom copy that is possibly a creepypasta.
Oh yeah, it's a whole thing. Like they really have the character and the brand dialed in right down to the sort of the visual stuff that they produce alongside it. So Master Boot Record streams on Twitch of them doing composing, and it's really cool. That whole look. But I was curious what you would think about this album, because at its heart, this is very much a metal album. Right. Like in terms of content, like they say it's metal and synth and classical, but the way that the classical comes in, and they probably know this, they're basically producing neoclassical metal, which was the subgenres of metal are a nightmare, much like any major genre of music. But you're probably offhandedly familiar with neoclassical because that is the style of mid to late 80s shredders like Yngwie Malmsteen and Jason Becker and Marty Friedman, who went on to play in Megadeth and stuff. And it's this very virtuosic, I'm shredding, I'm playing these huge, sweeping, very difficult arpeggios really, really fast. All of my harmony and sort of melodic construction is inspired either by like Bach counterpoint, like classical counterpoint rules, or that like Baroque Paganini, because Paganini was like the OG shredder. Like he wrote stuff that was insanely hard to play on violin. And he sort of has become like an inspiration for a lot of those 80s Guitar Hero types. This is literally just a chiptunes translation of that. If you've ever listened to any albums by those guys when they're not part of regular bands, they sound like this, but with real instruments. It's incredible. Like as soon as right down to like all the pacing changes of like, oh, we're going to be slow for a little bit, and then here's like 30 seconds of shredding, and then we're gonna slow down, and here's a nice little harpsichord, and here's 15 seconds of shredding, and then listen to these chords, like it makes it really fun to hear somebody recreate that, like in chiptunes. It's really cool because I had a big neoclassical phase in like high school.
I mean, I do like metal. I'm not like a hardcore metal fan, but I could name a couple of bands that I really like and different subgenres. Like I like Japanese speed metal and, symphonic metal and even some folk metal.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I do like metal. And the chiptune presentation of, this very incredibly intricate metal music is just, it does blow me away. Now, Master Boot Record has a bunch of albums, actually, like about a dozen, it seems, looking on their Bandcamp right now. Like actually 13 is what I count. So And this one, though, it was very intense. It's actually kind of exhausting to listen to. It's just, it just slams in. It just slammed into me. And it's a very short album, too. It's only like, what, 37 minutes, something like that. So by the end of it, like, I couldn't listen to it twice in a row without just like, oh my God, I'm just, all right. Just, I need something calmer now.
Which is also true to the genre. So,
yeah. But I didn't feel that like that with some of the other albums, because I have listened to probably most of the Master Boot Record albums at least once or twice now, and I don't remember feeling like that with the other ones. Yeah, I wonder if that's because this is literally 2 tracks. Each one is like 15 or 20 minutes long. So each one's kind of its own, like, a whole album. Like, you could cut these into multiple tracks too. Like,
oh sure, it's a full-fledged album. Like you said, there's lots of parts where it will change feel in the middle of a song. So I'm not sure how they decided to make it 2 tracks. Probably just instinct, or how they felt they wanted it to come together. Yeah, there's so much cool stuff to talk about in this. Like, for example, as part of the chiptunes, one thing I really like is a lot of the power chord, which comes up a lot in metal, like that chugging power chord is reproduced in this through basically like a Flopatron sample, which I don't know. Are you familiar with that? Or, no. Okay, so Flopatron is, you've probably seen videos of people using like a bunch of floppy drives to play music.
Oh, that's what that's called. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's developed by this engineer who was the first to do it. And you basically, all these drives have like a little step motor in them that you control very precisely. And you basically make the motor move at the frequency you want to hear. So it kind of grinds at that frequency. That's what it sounds like he's using. Probably not the actual physical hardware, like some recreation of it in his music software. I really like that as like that crunchy power metal sound.
Yeah, crunchy is a good way of describing it, because like this album is this incredibly intricate metal music, but it's made to sound like it's coming from this very old style of computer with a limited sound card system, like an old sound blaster or whatever. Even though, like, I don't think it was physically, I don't think a 486, DX33 could possibly play this music no matter how you rendered it, because like, or at least compose it. Like maybe it could play it back, because it's just like, it's so layered and so complex in terms of its instrumentation. But like, it does sound like it. Like, of course, I think sort of like the biggest inspiration or sort of source is the fact that, the Doom video games, all their music, basically stolen, repurposed metal music rendered down into MIDI so it could fit on the video game. And this is taking that and then extrapolating it to an impossible like level of complexity. But I don't know, it still sounds like it's coming from that era.
Oh yeah, I agree. Yeah. Let me give people a sample of what I'm talking about. So this is a part about 11 minutes into the first track where it just becomes this brutally effective, heavy breakdown. So I absolutely love this type of stuff where probably the really kind of through the middle is fairly calm. And then there's just this drop into these like heavy, crunchy is really the best way to describe them, even though I've already used the word. I don't have a thesaurus in front of me, but like that really just grinding metal. It reminds me a lot of other, even more modern metal sounds, like early Animals as Leaders sounded like that before their kind of like more jazz funk turn in their last few albums. Just like really, really heavy guitars against like a quarter note feel, like just kind of dragged out. Like it makes everything feel extended but heavy. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely, if you're a metal fan, I mean, I think you should definitely check this out, or a chiptune fan, because there's this level of energy and the chiptune sound. You've actually read up on this guy in terms of like how he presents. Does he actually use a real guitar? Is this all through like MIDI and synthesizers, or like?
As far as I can understand, so I guess for some live stuff or some streaming stuff, he plays guitar. But I think when producing and composing, so I found a Reddit AMA out of character in 2018. And when people asked, one of the most repeated questions was, what do you do to make your music? What's your production style? And he basically just said, I use Cubase with a couple plugins, like a VST, like a virtual instrument plugin, and didn't really seem to be that fancy. I think just really good at making a simple set of tools work for them.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cool.
Every time I need to get jazzed, to get energized, this is definitely going to go on the playlist of like.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Nice.
Music to, I don't know, kill a bunch of zombies by, to work out to. I don't know. Something like that. It is very good in that regard.
I could see that. I would say the one criticism I have, and this is just generally that I had with this genre of metal in general, is that it does, while it has a lot of these shifts, it does start to feel a lot of very samey to me.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, like, it can be, I think maybe that's the fatigue you're talking about. For me, is just, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. It's not like a harsh criticism, but it is very much means that it is relegated to like workout music or video gaming music.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's music is obviously like, this is the kind of music that is made to show off, to showcase one's technical skills. And after a point, you're like, we get it.
Perfect. Thank you for saying that, because that kind of segues into the other thing that I think doesn't really work as well for me.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to sound like a criticism. Like, obviously, learning to be a really great EDM or like music producer like Master Boot Record takes a lot of skill and practice and dedication to a craft, and they're very, very good at it. But part of the appeal of metal is that the person shredding also put a lot of time and effort and dedication into being able to play a guitar like that. And I think sometimes those extended sequences of like sweeping arpeggios sort of loses its luster when it's a computer doing it.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense, like the production and all the other side of creating it is interesting, but there's also sort of this technical gap of it's really wild that a human being can move their fingers that fast.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a different technical admiration that goes into it.
Well, the sound is different, and there's a bit of more like, it's not precisely engineered like a computer is. Like there's still a bit of like randomness, or like, I mean, you can never play the exact same note twice, like there's always like, so I mean, that I don't know how much of that is the human ear can actually perceive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when it's literally programmed into a software and then played out, and it's going to be exactly the same every time you play it because that's how it's programmed.
Yeah.
Then, I see what you mean.
I think what I'm trying to say is that just what you admire about this music technically, or from what you admire about the artist's work is just different.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the appeal of metal doesn't quite carry over, but it picks up a lot of other interesting appeal that kind of replaces it.
Well, the whole thing is like, this is music that is showing off the technical skill, but like that's only part of the joy of listening to music. It's also about like what it makes us feel, and like sometimes less is more. I mean, in case of like, if you're just being bombarded with all of this really intense stuff and there's no, I mean, there are the quiet bits, but even those are like still extremely complex chamber music, with the harpsichord and everything.
Yeah. Can we talk about the harpsichord? Oh, man.
We have not.
We have not talked about the harpsichord yet. The harpsichord sounds like this. So that part comes in towards the back third, really less than third, of the second track, around 18 and a half minutes in, where there's just this wild shredding, synth is losing its mind, and then it just breaks out into this harpsichord. And the harpsichord appears a lot throughout this album.
Mm-hmm.
Part of those classical influences. It has a really unique sound that I like. But here, I just thought these like, God, I wish I knew more about music and like ear training, because there's just something about like the width of these chords and the way that they come in that just really snap me out of listening and like really grab me.
Mm-hmm.
Just the slight dissonance in them is just it's really cool.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, I do like these parts. It is a bit of ear candy in terms of like, ooh, this is interesting. I like this. Very Baroque.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely an influence.
Yeah. Some of his earlier albums are a bit more approachable in terms of like intensity or ear exhaustion, I guess.
I will have to go back and revisit them. But yeah.
Yeah. Because, well, again, I wasn't listening to him as closely as I was this album, because you know, we weren't reviewing them, but like, I don't remember this sensation as much. And it only really set in like when I started listening to it to back to back. Cause again, it was so short. I could listen to it like twice, you know, in a little over an hour. And it was just like the second time was I just like, oh my God, I just stopped this for a second.
Pause.
But yeah, it's a fascinating example of chiptune music, of metal music, of this unique synthesis. Nobody's doing anything like this.
Nope.
And Master Bruger is clearly incredibly passionate about their work. This again, because it's not just the music, which shows a lot of skill and dedication and artistic like vision, but there's also like, again, the puzzles and the whole, like, if you solve puzzles, you get access to certain tracks that no one else can. And there's I don't know. I just really admire artists who are going out doing their own thing, and clearly, you know, they're obviously not doing it for the money.
Oh yeah, but putting in that little bit of extra kind of engage their audience. It's really important, and it really shows in what they do. I agree. I also think this is great at 36 minutes. It's a quick listen. If you're even remotely interested in chiptunes or metal, you're probably going to like it.
Yeah. And speaking of other artists who are really going above and beyond the Call of Duty.
You want to get into some Fornax Void?
Let's get into some Fornax Void. So that is track 1, Cyberspace Data Space, which is it's Cyberspace Database. And that track is called Corporate Intranet Menu Music. One of the things that, just to give you an idea about Fornax Void, a link that we will definitely put in the show notes, project documentation page for this album, which is a listing of every single track, all 55 tracks. With when the production started, when the song was released, and what it was produced with. And this one was produced in Renoise using Kong Legacy plugins, M1, Wavestation, Mono/Poly, later added a JV 1080, JV 2080, Akai S1000, TX802, M1R, and Morpheus elements in Cubase. More information here. It just goes on and on and on. And it's also done with a little under construction thing on there, like a GeoCities page. So it's still formatted like a fucking web page from like 2002, which is amazing in its own right. So this album is a monster. It is 4 hours and 47 minutes approximately. It could easily, and perhaps should have been, multiple different albums because there's so much to cover. But before we get into the album, let's talk a little bit about the artist. Fornax Void is someone I've been aware of for years now. I discovered him on Tumblr when I was looking up Vaporwave on Tumblr. He is based, I believe, in Switzerland. Yep. And he is in some ways sort of like, again, sort of an opposite, but in some ways this mirror of Master Bootleg, because he's also obsessed with obsolete computer technology, but he is looking at sort of like the corporate utopian aspect of it, like, which is this very clean, very sterile kind of environment, but adding a bit of dissonance to it. He has an about on his YouTube page, which is, it's a Fornax Void is an audiovisual arts project founded by David Eisner in 2012. Project's main source of inspiration is the technology and design language of the late 20th century, at times associated with the terms new aesthetic, cyberpunk, ambient music, and vaporwave. The project's audiovisual output shares similarity or can be categorized within these topical genres, if needed. Practically, the work of Fornax Void makes heavy use of older technologies like VHS, audio tape, CRT screens, analog synthesizers, or retro computer graphics. Seeks to carry over the aesthetics of these technologies into a contemporary context. So, in other words, hauntology as fuck.
Yep.
Yeah. I actually purchased one of Fornax Void's earlier projects, which was a VHS tape, which was a VHS video tape, sort of visual album of one of his previous albums called Memory Machine. It came with several mini posters with a vaporwave aesthetic and CDs of it. Although I gave one of the CDs to a friend and that CD got jammed in their CD player in their car. So whoops.
Wow.
So yeah, sorry, Faye. Didn't mean that to happen.
No.
This newest album, Cyberspace Database, is the compilation of 5 years worth of work. It was first pre-released in January 2017 with 16 tracks, and then he just kept adding tracks until he declared it completed on February 2 of 2020. And so he calls this cyberpunk ambient, I think. Mm-hmm. And it is very ambient.
Yeah, but also really varied.
Yeah.
Which is why it's almost a shame that it's so long that we can't talk about all of it in great detail, because all of it's really, really good. And all of it is so interesting and covers so much ground that I would love to keep just talking about it forever.
Oh, yeah. Because, yeah, every time you again, 55 tracks, I couldn't listen to it in one go because, but I would remember what track I had left off and then pick it up, a couple hours later or whatever, or the next day and oh, yeah. And yeah, there's albums within albums here. There is a physical release of this album. It's on 4 CDs, and there's a deluxe version that comes with booklets and posters and other things, and it's very tempting to get.
It is. I'm looking at it now.
Yeah, I've been I hadn't gotten yet because I've got too many things in my house. I need to. But then on the other hand, it looks really neat. I just also love that this documentation of a lot of these albums, we've had these questions what did they use to make this? And Fornax Void will tell you, I use this on, as you can look on my webpage. It kind of reminds me something somebody once told me about artists. Artists either wear sweatpants and hoodies, or they're in utterly over the top stylish clothes, evening suits or gowns, or fashion, very eccentric, but very fashionable clothes. And it's so musicians are either yeah, I did this, I guess, for this, or this is the other extreme, right? This is just I have categorized it in an Excel sheet and put it online, which I love. But yeah, this is what even is an album. I
guess before we get into tracks, we'll tackle this because something I wrote after listening to it a few times. Yeah, what is an album? Which I know we've discussed before, and I don't remember exactly when. So the default answer is, of course, whatever the artist wants it to be, right? That's their vision. That's how they want to release their music. That's how they want to put it out. But that's something so long and so varied, and that covers such a range of time and influences. I just wish it was split up a little bit, I guess.
This is the best buy. You can buy the digital album for $1 on Bandcamp, and it's just put that album on loop, and by the time you're done with it, you oh wow, this is a new track. It's your own 24/7 ambient playlist, so yeah, at least support the artist, man. But damn, this is just the best value in ambient music you're gonna get.
The only reason I wish it was split up, obviously, is just because I think at the length it is and the way it's consumed, there's just a lot of stuff I think that'll get lost. Just because it's a difficult thing to commit to, which then the obvious counterexample in my head is well, that's the point, right? Do you dive into something and really earn all those little nuggets by taking that full journey through a long album? And I don't know exactly where I come down on that in the end, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if this has to do with the fact that Fornax Void likes putting out physical merch, because the videotape was very lovingly made, and so was the poster art. So he's not just a musician; he's an audiovisual artist. And so, what if he'd been working on this music for 5 years and he wanted to have a physical release to go with it instead of having multiple physical releases? This is one big fuck off compilation of tremendous value, and also just a big work instead of trying to come up with different concepts, because they all kind of fit under this the design language and the corporate aesthetic of the late 20th century. I mean, this all does fit within that very broad topic, I think, concept, even the more mystical ones.
Absolutely. It doesn't feel disjointed in that way, for sure. But at the same time, there's some nice little collections of tracks where I'm oh, this is 30 minutes of music that could just be a killer EP also. But yeah, I think actually, does it get converted into physical medium is actually a really good point. And probably, I wouldn't be surprised if that was a driving force. Just looking at this executive edition of this album is beautiful. Then yeah, it maybe is not satisfying to release a digital only 30-minute album or whatever.
Because like the track links on this album go like the shortest track is like a minute long. Like the last track is like a minute long. And then there are tracks that are like half an hour long, like a single track. So yeah, it's wild. But it's not in like the overall feel is ambient, but like there's some tracks that are kind of like John Carpenter music, like this old school, like driving beat, kind of like gave me like the opening credits of a Carpenter movie kind of feel to it. But on the other hand, like one of my favorite tracks is actually track 23 because it's a piano solo, which is track 23 is called Druids of Lakeview Data Center, recorded on the 1920s Berger and Jacob upright piano. And let us just put a little sample of that in. Yeah, like you've been listening to this very kind of like cosmic sort of ambient music and you just kind of wash over these soundscapes. And then it's like, oh, here's this sort of slow and melancholy kind of piano solo. And it's just you're just sitting on the lake and like reflecting on life. I don't know, like it just comes out of nowhere and then it just disappears again. And we're back in the cyber void.
Yeah, that was one thing I really liked is the constant switching up. Like I said, it covers a lot of ground. And sometimes it does that quite drastically. So a lot of my favorite tracks were the soothing ambient. There's a lot of just calm, chill parts of this album. In particular, the second of the two 18-minute Void Gate tracks. Panorama Station is really nice. Dreams of the Void, Sempiternal Night Shift are all great. Hexadecimal Love Letters. I mean, there's 50 tracks, right? I can just label off a bunch of them.
Yeah.
But then there's stuff like this 2-minute track 27, Ancient Data Tapes.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Which is just this warbly, glitched out mess, like in a good way, that just is like between all of these other really nice.
You know what that reminded me of?
What's that?
I had that in my notes as well. That reminded me so much of a Boards of Canada track.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Like in a good way. This is like, because I love Boards of Canada, and this is like, oh, he's hitting on this, and like it's got that. It's almost like it sounds like it's being played in reverse, whatever it was. I mean, but yeah, very warbly, very warm, kind of broken. So it's like cracks through this otherwise perfect facade of like our office environment. One thing you should do is definitely check out the Fornox Void YouTube channel because he's done a lot of music videos of songs from this album. There's like a 20-minute track of the Panorama Station, actually. They're computer animated and he did the animation himself and it looks like something from the 90s. It's very kind of blocky, kind of like, but 3D. Probably the best one is like the title track, Corporate Intranet Menu Music. He did a music video in the Quake 1 engine, but rendered at 4K. So this video for the first track in the Quake 1 engine is like this sort of flyby of like first an office and then it goes into wilder environments. And it fits perfectly to the music, but he's done other videos as well in like Blender and some of them are very cosmic. Like he did one, not just of the Panorama Station, but there is one of the Void Wizard Saga.
Yep.
Which are like several tracks, but he strings them all together to make a little story about wizards going through space and magic gates and using synthesizers to do stuff. I don't know. It's good. I like it.
Oh, yeah.
Because I really do like this idea of taking old technology and like resurrecting it to have it do one last task to create one more piece of artwork, at least to bring new life into old machines. It's a real interesting body of work. I mean, just this alone, like God, would be enough. But were there any other tracks that you really dug in particular?
Yeah, I think there's a handful of songs. Probably I first noticed it in Oberheim Taxi, which is track 18, that have these really, there's something about the synth that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And it occurs to me, and I mean this is a compliment because it's a great album, but some of it sounds like more abrasive Minecraft ambient.
I can definitely
I don't know why. There's
Yeah.
just like the way there's that very just light background synth comes through a lot. And I don't know how people respond to me saying Minecraft, but if you haven't actually listened, independent of what you think of the game, because it's like a meme game or Notch is a piece of shit or whatever, the actual music is really, really good. It's a really, really great ambient album.
Oh, yeah.
And there's parts of this that are like a slightly more, in a good way, abrasive and energetic version of some stuff you hear in there to me. I don't know how that connection formed in my head, but that's what it is.
Yeah, because this isn't even really like dark ambient. Like I put it as like almost like new age kind of cosmic ambient. He calls it cyberpunk ambient, but like
it's tagged as dream punk too, which I'd also buy.
Interesting about looking at the notes for track 18 is that it was 3 layers of the Oberheim expander recorded to VHS tape. So that might explain the unique sound that it had.
Yeah.
Because he's very much interested in the distortion and the interference created by older, obsolete recording technology. Yeah, there's so much in this album. I mean, maybe at some point we should do a live stream and just talk about it and just go through it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because when you get down into, like, again, like track 47, which was the Kudenshu Corporation Surveillance Center. That's also with the Oberheimer expander. That's a very kind of sinister, faster paced song. Again, it's very like stealth music in a game. It's sneaking through, spying on people, that kind of sense. So yeah, it's
very Carpenter too.
Yeah, definitely. It's just such an interesting and unique body of work over such a long period of time. I don't know if any other artist doing anything exactly like this.
It's probably one of the more unique things that we've covered so far in the year we've been doing this. It is really interesting.
The thing is, you just put it on and just listen to it as long as you want. And like, yeah, it's just, I'm sure we're missing other things in there. God, that's the only downside of this album is that you're going to miss something. Cause like you can't pay attention to it. Cause like after about 20 minutes, it becomes like part of the environment. It is like how the best ambient works and that you just kind of forget that it's there, but it is there.
Yep. What I ended up doing was, like you said, you have to listen to it in segments because I'm very rarely sitting for 5 hours at a time.
Yeah.
What I would actually do is when I'd start a second listen, I'd go back a few tracks just to kind of reset, because just kind of under the assumption that towards the tail end of my last listening section, I was starting to get fatigued and not really paying attention.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, you really pick up stuff when you have that kind of overlapping listening.
Yeah. Again, and also the whole Void Wizard saga, which is tracks 48 through 51, shorter thing. And he made that with a sample pack. He's actually released several sample packs for different synthesizers. So you can just download, and if you're your own musician, you can sort of mess around with it yourself. So yeah, it's like Mini Brute, a Yamaha keyboard sampler, and just old piano sampler. Like, yeah, he's just releasing a lot of stuff for the community just to have fun with. But yeah, that's the thing is like we produce technology at such a relentless pace that we seldom do we realize even half the potential of so many of the machines and software and things that we create, because a newer thing has come about. So we might as well learn the new thing and just get rid of the old thing. So, but there's always these preservationists who are, for lack of better terms, like really interested in pushing a given machine to its utter limits to see what it's absolutely capable of. And both the artists we feature today are sort of really in that sort of vein of like, there's a whole genre of it, like the whole existence of the Floppotron, like exploiting a machine for the incidental sounds that it makes, not for its intended purpose. You know, one of the most moving music videos I've seen was a cover of a Radiohead song that was played through not just Floppotrons, but like other obsolete machines. And like Tom York's voice, I think it was kind of like Big Ideas Don't Get Any. I think that was the song. And it's just sort of, for me, sort of heart-ready. It's just like these machines trying to do one last thing before they're consigned to the recycling center.
It's also interesting, just as sort of a last comparison between these two, is I'm really glad you found the link of Fornax Void talking about their whole process, because it also highlights how different each of their approaches are. Because Master Beat Record is very, almost functionally minimalist in some sense. Maybe the music is not, but his production, if it's really just Cubase and some plugins, like you said in 2018, then that's pretty wild compared to Fornax of like, yeah, I dug up this synthesizer and played it through VHS, then recorded that VHS through this, and then totally different approaches.
Yeah, like if you look on Fornax's Void's Tumblr, he occasionally posts photos of like things that he's found. I remember one post from back in the day, like, oh, there's literally some spreadsheets of his equipment that he lists. But like he had like, oh, I found a bunch of monitors that people will just let me take away. So he just like a dozen different CRT monitors that he had like rescued from the dumpster or whatever.
Do something with them.
Yeah, exactly. But he apparently also does like physical installation arts. He's just interested in exploring these old ideas or these old technologies, but in new contexts.
I would love for him to have, now that you said installation art, some like high-end art gallery to really just commission some big piece of installation art. Because I love that audio multimedia installation art. Some of it's so good.
Oh yeah. Giving old machines new life, especially in artistic ways, is my jam. Just go through their Tumblr at some point. Just go through Fornax Void's Tumblr. There's just a lot of. I'm browsing it right now. There's just a lot of cool stuff.
So I sure hope that we've convinced people to take the plunge on this album, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think the whole thing is also up on YouTube if you just want to listen to it on there. But like you can download the whole album and just like be absorbed into cyberspace. It was a lot of fun, and it's definitely a good counterpoint to Diffract, which is also fun, but in a very different way.
I'm very glad they ended up together because I would not have thought to pair these. So I'm glad that you suggested it.
And I wasn't really thinking about it. It was just like Fornax Void had been in the back of my mind for a long time, and then Master Brute Record I just kind of noticed on YouTube one day. It's like, oh, this is cool. Do you want to do this one? And away we go.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this little dig into computers and cyberspace and the technology of the past. Next episode, we're going to start tackling a topic again, kind of a big one if we want it to be. We're doing the concepts of the hyperreal and culture jamming, which is really how consumerism, sort of the world that consumerism creates for us and how you can push back against it, basically. Right? Is that that's how I would classify it?
Yeah, certainly these are very core to the ideas of a lot of the music we're talking about, especially vaporwave.
Critiques of capitalism, etc.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to do that. I think it's an excuse to sit down and read a bunch of pretentious books that I've had since film school and haven't had a chance to touch. So definitely keep an eye out for that. If you have any thoughts on that or anything we talked about today, you can always find us on Twitter at Night Clerk Radio. I am at Burke McBurkinson. Ross is at Ross Payton. We're also Night Clerk Radio on websites, Facebooks, Instagrams, all those things that you're supposed to interact with. We also are on Night Clerk Radio on YouTube, where I've been uploading sort of video copies of these episodes, but also it's a great place to kind of comment, reach out to us. I try to respond to things there. Otherwise, you can rate and review us on services like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, basically anywhere that podcasts can be found. I've noticed we started showing up on Amazon. So there's plenty of ways to let us know if you like what we're doing. We're also working on, hopefully within the next month or so, targeting March 1st, maybe I'll just say it, so we have to do it, is we're going to be launching a Patreon that will have bonus episodes, maybe some additional writings. I think we're figuring out exactly what we want to put on it, but it'll definitely be a way to sort of interact and support what we do. But in the meantime, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.